The 9,593rd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. I should like to take this opportunity to pay tribute on behalf of the Council to His Excellency Mr. Kazuki Yamakaze, Permanent Representative of Japan, for his service as President of the Council for the month of March. I am sure I speak for all members of the Council in expressing our deep appreciation to Ambassador Yamazaki and his team for the great diplomatic skills with which they conducted the Council's business last month. The provisional agenda for this meeting is threats to international peace and security. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Syrian Arab Republic to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Mr. Khaled Khiari, Assistant Secretary General for Middle East, Asia and the Pacific, the Departments of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs and Peace Operations to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Khaled Khiari.
Madam President, yesterday the Islamic Republic of Iran transmitted identical letters to the Secretary General and to the Security Council stating that Israel has attacked the location of its diplomatic premises in Damascus by missile strikes, killing at least 5 Iranian personnel, including senior military advisors, and injuring others. There have been subsequent media reports today that the death toll has risen to 13, 7 Iranian personnel and 6 Syrian citizens. I reiterate the Secretary General's condemnation of the attack. Let me be very clear. The inviolability of diplomatic and consular premises and personnel must be respected in all cases in accordance with international law. The sovereignty and territorial integrity of member states must be respected in accordance with international law. The rules-based international order is essential for international peace and security, which this Council is mandated to maintain. Madam President, Special Envoy Geir Pedersen has kept this Council apprised of the unrelenting violence on the ground in Syria, which features 6 foreign armies operating on its territory, impacting the lives of civilians and moving a peaceful resolution of the conflict farther out of reach. Among them, increasingly lethal attacks on Iran-linked targets in Syria have been attributed to Israel, especially since the current conflict with Hamas in Gaza began on 7th of October. Open sources have reportedly at least a dozen such attacks since the beginning of this year. While Israel has rarely claimed responsibility for any of these incidents, its officials have repeatedly acknowledged its military operations in Syria and have suggested that more such operations will occur in the future. We appeal to the Council today, as we do every month, to continue to actively engage all concerned parties to prevent further escalation and the worsening of tensions that undermine regional peace and security. Madam President, allow me to reiterate the Secretary General's call on all concerned to exercise utmost restraint and avoid further escalation. I also underline his consistent calls on all parties to respect all their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, as applicable, and to avoid attacks that could harm civilian and damage civilian infrastructure. Any miscalculation could lead to broader conflict in an already volatile region, with devastating consequences for civilians who are already seeing unprecedented suffering in Syria, Lebanon, the occupied Palestinian territory, and the broader Middle East. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank Mr. Chiari for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Госпожа председатель, мы приняли к сведению фактологический брифинг помощника генерального секретаря Халида Хиари об очередных атаках Израиля по территории Сирийской Арабской Республики. Нам при этом кажется странным, что представитель секретариата оперирует понятием международный порядок, основанный на правилах, rules-based international order, который так любят наши западные партнеры, вместо того, чтобы ссылаться на устав ООН и международное право. Благодарим Мальтийское председательство за оперативный созыв сегодняшнего неочередного заседания Совета Безопасности ООН по пункту повестки дня «Угроза международному миру и безопасности». Мы инициировали его, чтобы обсудить непрекращающиеся ракетно-бомбовые удары армии обороны Израиля по различным объектам в Сирии на фоне беспрецедентной по масштабам жертв военной операции Западного Иерусалима в секторе Газа, которая продолжается, несмотря на требования резолюции Совета Безопасности 2728, немедленно прекратить огонь. Крайне обеспокоены таким вопиющим пренебрежением израильского руководства при попустительстве США в отношении имеющего обязательную юридическую силу решения Совета. Яркий пример — атака Израиля по гуманитарному конвою на выезде со склада в центральной части Газы, который координировала НПО World Central Kitchen. В результате этого авиаудара погибли 7 гуманитарных работников. То, что действия израильских военных повлекли гибель мирных гражданских лиц, признал даже премьер-министр Израиля. Рассчитываем, что мы это еще обсудим отдельно. Сейчас же мы собрались, чтобы рассмотреть еще один аспект безрассудных действий Израиля. Госпожа председатель, вчера, 1 апреля, ВВС Израиля нанесли удар по зданию консульства Исламской Республики Иран в Дамаске. В результате атаки строение было полностью разрушено. Пострадал офис посла Исламской Республики Иран в Сирии. По поступающей информации имеется значительное количество погибших и раненых среди его сотрудников. Самым решительным образом осуждаем данное нападение. Считаем категорически неприемлемыми любые посягательства на дипломатические и консульские объекты, неприкосновенность которых гарантируется соответствующими Венскими конвенциями 1961 и 1963 годов. Особое внимание хотели бы обратить на тот факт, что это уже не первая атака, которая была осуществлена Израилем в густонаселенном столичном районе Дамаска, что создало высокие риски массовых жертв среди гражданского населения. С самого начала эскалации палестино-израильского противостояния 7 октября количество израильских атак по объектам сирийской гражданской инфраструктуры и соседей САР кратно возросло. Так, в ночь на 29 марта израильская авиация нанесла ракетные удары по различным объектам в окрестностях Алеппо. Жертвами той атаки стали десятки человек, многие получили ранения. Ранее, 28 марта, в результате авианалета Израиля в Дамасской провинции пострадали 2 мирных граждан. 17 и 19 марта обстрелы Израиля совершались уже по северо-восточным и южным окрестностям Дамаска со стороны оккупированных сирийских Голан. Израильская авиация только за прошедшие месяцы несколько раз атаковала международные аэропорты в Дамаске и Алеппо, которые служат основными воротами для ввоза в Сирию ООНовской гуманитарной помощи, а также наносила удары по районам Дер-эз-Зора и Абу-Кемаля, где сирийские военные продолжают упорную борьбу с недобитыми боевиками террористических группировок, которым наши американские коллеги, вопреки своим громким заявлениям, на деле обеспечивают опеку и покровительство. Но эту ситуацию мы оставим для заседания Совета Безопасности по Сирии. Госпожа председатель, Российская Федерация решительно осуждает продолжающиеся налеты по суверенной территории Сирии, расценивая их как грубейшее нарушение суверенитета и территориальной целостности этого государства. Исходим из того, что подобные агрессивные действия Израиля, рассчитанные на дальнейшее разжигание конфликта, являются абсолютно недопустимыми и должны быть прекращены. Настоятельно призываем Западный Иерусалим отказаться от практики провокационных силовых акций на территории Сирии и других соседних с ней стран, чреватой крайне опасными рисками и последствиями в масштабах всего региона и без того дестабилизированного в результате непрекращающейся уже полгода эскалации насилия вокруг Газа. Призываем международное сообщество безоговорочно осудить безрассудные действия Израиля, нарушающие суверенитет Сирийской Арабской Республики и неприкосновенность дипломатической собственности. Считаем необходимым для всех ответственных членов международного сообщества дать объективную правовую оценку агрессии Израиля в регионе Ближнего Востока, игнорирующего не только положение Устава ООН и профильных резолюций Совета Безопасности Генеральной Ассамблеи, но и фундаментальных принципов Венской конвенции о дипломатических и консульских сношениях. Коллеги, я надеюсь на солидарность членов Совета Безопасности в том, что атаки на дипломатические учреждения недопустимы. Ведь эта солидарная позиция, если не будет подтверждена, в следующий раз авиалету может подвергнуться диппредставительству любого государства. Рассчитываем на то, что каждый из вас сегодня даст справедливую оценку действиям Израиля в отношении иранского диппредставительства. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation and pass the floor to the representative of China.
主席女士，首先我要祝贺马耳他轮任本月的安理会主席。中国代表团将给予你和你的同事充分合作。我也要赞赏日本作为上个月安理会主席所开展的工作。主席女士，伊朗驻叙利亚大马士革外交馆舍昨天遭到空袭，造成多名伊方人员死亡，馆舍严重受损。这一袭击严重违反联合国宪章和国际法，既侵犯了叙利亚的主权，也侵犯了伊朗的主权，性质十分恶劣。中方对此予以强烈谴责。25年前，中国驻南联盟大使馆曾遭到以美国为首北约的空袭， 造成人员伤亡和馆舍损毁。我们对伊朗政府和人民目前的悲痛感同身受，对伊朗政府和人民表示深切的同情和慰问。根据维也纳外交关系公约和公认的国际关系基本准则，外交机构的安全不容侵犯。如果放任这种毫无底线、不计后果的行为，有罪不罚，将释放严重的错误信号，鼓励更多的冒险行径。我们注意到，伊朗以及叙利亚等阿拉伯国家对以色列提出了严正的抗议和谴责，也希望以色列方面对此作出回应。主席女士，去年10月加沙冲突爆发以来，我们见证了民宅被袭、学校被袭、医院被袭、人道设施被袭、联合国机构被袭。今天我们又见证了外交馆舍被袭。国际法和国际关系基本准则的红线被一次次的突破，人类道德良知的底线被一次次的击穿。这样的局面，这样的惨状必须立即停止。上个星期，安理会通过第2728号决议，要求立即在加沙实现停火。我们强烈呼吁国际社会共同努力，确保这一决议得到落实，不要让穆斯林信众的整个斋月都在枪炮声中度过。当前，加沙地面的局势仍在不断恶化，外溢风险日益显现，中东地区的形势已经岌岌可危。以色列频繁对叙利亚、黎巴嫩境内的目标实行跨境打击，严重侵犯有关国家的主权、独立和领土完整，加剧了整个地区的紧张局势。这种挑衅行动可能引发更大的动荡，危及整个地区的安全，必须立即停止。中方呼吁各方，特别是对以色列有重要影响的国家，发挥建设性作用，为推动加沙立即停火、中东局势早日降温、恢复和平稳定，做出切实的努力。谢谢主席。
Of China and pass the floor to the representative of France.
Madame la Présidente, je tiens tout d'abord à vous féliciter pour votre accession à la présidence de ce Conseil et remercier la délégation du Japon pour son action tout au long du mois de mars. Je remercie M. Chiari pour son intervention. Les frappes d'hier à Damas s'inscrivent dans un contexte de montée continue des tensions en Syrie et dans la région. Depuis l'attaque terroriste du Hamas le 7 octobre, l'Iran et ses partenaires régionaux portent une lourde responsabilité dans cette escalade. Les populations civiles en sont les premières victimes et la sécurité des États de la région est directement menacée par celle-ci. Notre responsabilité collective est donc de tout faire pour apaiser les tensions. Il est nécessaire que l'ensemble des acteurs de la région fassent preuve de retenue. La France continue pour sa part à œuvrer pour prévenir un embrasement régional. En coordination avec ses partenaires, elle est mobilisée en faveur d'une désescalade au Conseil de sécurité et partout où cela est nécessaire. C'est le cas au Liban, où elle met en garde contre toute volonté d'escalade. Il est urgent que les parties travaillent à la pleine mise en œuvre de la résolution 1701. Nous incitons, par notre dialogue avec les parties, à une cessation des hostilités. La FINUL a un rôle crucial à jouer dans ce contexte et nous saluons son action dans ces conditions difficiles. Face à la situation très préoccupante en mer Rouge et dans le golfe d'Aden, la France rappelle son attachement à la liberté de navigation. Elle condamne fermement les actions déstabilisatrices menées par les Houthis qui doivent cesser. Elle continuera à assumer ses responsabilités pour assurer la sécurité en mer Rouge. Enfin, en Syrie, la France appelle à la mise en œuvre de la résolution 2254 adoptée à l'unanimité par ce Conseil et déplore le refus du régime de Damas, soutenu par ses alliés russes et iraniens, de s'engager dans un processus politique crédible et inclusif. Les Syriens continuent à en payer le prix. Madame la Présidente, la France œuvre pour éviter l'escalade dans la région, en Syrie, au Liban, au Yémen, ainsi que pour apporter une réponse politique et humanitaire à la crise à Gaza. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France and pass the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Madam President. I extend my congratulations to Malta on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for the month of April. And I want to assure you of Algeria's full support. I would also like to congratulate Japan for the successful presidency during the month of March. I thank Mr. Khaled Khiari for its presentation. First, I want to tell our heartfelt condolences to the people and government of Iran following the deadly airstrike by the Israeli aviation on their diplomatic premises in Damascus yesterday. This attack is a clear violation of international law, particularly the inviolability of diplomatic and consular premises as outlined in the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations and Vienna Convention on Consular Relations. Such a grave breach of international obligation by the Israeli occupying power cannot be justified or tolerated. We must raise a strong voice against the dangerous implication of this provocation, which could lead to escalating tensions and wider regional consequences. The timing of this attack, in the face of international pressure for a ceasefire in Gaza through UN Security Council 2728, indicate a deliberate disregard for the call for cessation of hostilities coming from the whole international communities. The aim of such an act, deliberate act, is obvious: responding to international pressures by escalating the conflict, which prolong the killing of Palestinians for internal political calculation. It is evident that this dangerous act is of nature to draw the entire region into conflict, reflecting a belief of impunity by the Israeli occupying power, which considers itself above international law, akin to a reckless and checkered forces. This double standard, where the Israeli power disregard the very laws expecting order to uphold, undermines the very foundation of our international order. This behavior falls short of what we expect from a responsible member of our organization. We have previously emphasized the need to stop the occupying authorities and a violation of its international law. Madam President, the UN Security Council must respond firmly and decisively to this challenge to fundamental principles of state sovereignty, diplomatic sanctity, and respect for territorial integrity. The integrity of our international order hangs on the balance, and there must be repercussion for such flagrant disregard of the law to reinforce our collective commitment to upholding it. The choice is stark. Either uphold the principle of the UN Charter on international law, or risk plunging into chaos and insecurity on a regional spillover. The time for resolute action is upon us. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria and pass the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I also want to thank you, congratulate you on assuming the presidency, to you and to Malta. And I want to thank Japan for leading us through the month of March. I thank Assistant Secretary General Chiari for his briefing. I would like to express our deepest concern over the new developments in the Middle East, including the recent attack on diplomatic premises of the Islamic Republic of Iran in Damascus on April 1st, resulting in several casualties. We condemn the attacks on diplomatic premises are unacceptable and unjustifiable. I would like to make 3 points in that regard. First, Slovenia is profoundly concerned over the escalation and spillover effects across the region. Current devastating situation in Gaza has already had a strong impact on the situation along the Blue Line and in the Red Sea. We continue to see other extremely concerning incidents in the region, including the one in Damascus yesterday. We strongly believe that tensions need to be reduced and the situation needs to be de-escalated. We appeal on all parties to show restraint. We call for the compliance with the Security Council Resolution 2728. A ceasefire in Gaza would ease tensions across the region. Secondly, all UN member states have an obligation to respect and act in accordance with the principles of the UN Charter, and especially its Article 2 on settling international disputes by peaceful means and on refraining from use of force. There is no room for arbitrary interpretations. The same standards apply to all member states of the United Nations. So we call on all to show restraint in the use of proxies, which could further fuel or provoke regional tensions. We are concerned over the escalatory rhetoric by different countries and actors, and we caution that any miscalculation could lead to unimaginable consequences. Thirdly, we call on all parties to respect international law. We remind that all military activities should be carried out in accordance with international law, including international humanitarian law. We underline that all the parties concerned need to fully comply with international law governing diplomatic and consular relations. Mr. President, it should be in no one's interest to have further dangerous escalation in the Middle East. Any of the geographically separated but ultimately intertwined crises could take on a life of their own. People of the region have suffered enough, and this includes people in Palestine, Israel, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Iran, and elsewhere. We should all place their interests first, and this is why it is crucial for this Council to send a clear call for restraint by all, starting with compliance with Resolution 2728 demanding a ceasefire. Slovenia stands ready to engage in a comprehensive response to the crisis. We underline the need for unity of the Council to maintain international law, peace and security. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia and pass the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Comme il s'agit de la première séance publique de ce mois, je vous assure du plein soutien de la Suisse pendant votre présidence et je remercie le Japon pour son excellente gestion au cours du mois de mars. Madame la Présidente, nous remercions le sous-secrétaire général pour le Moyen-Orient, Khaled Riari, pour son intervention détaillant les événements d'hier à Damas. La Suisse condamne la frappe aérienne contre le consulat de l'Iran à Damas qui a fait plusieurs morts et blessés. Cette frappe accroît considérablement le risque d'une escalade majeure dans la région. La spirale de l'escalade doit s'arrêter immédiatement. Cela implique par ailleurs la cessation des attaques des milices dans la région, ainsi que la mise en œuvre de la résolution 2728 exigeant un cessez-le-feu immédiat à Gaza. La Suisse rappelle d'ailleurs que la résolution 2254 appelle à un cessez-le-feu en Syrie au niveau national. Nous demandons à toutes les parties, ainsi qu'à ceux qui exercent de l'influence sur celle-ci, de faire preuve de la plus grande retenue. Tous les canaux de communication doivent être utilisés pour éviter tout malentendu. Une seule erreur de calcul peut avoir des conséquences désastreuses. Une nouvelle détérioration de la situation doit impérativement être évitée et nous avons collectivement les moyens de l'empêcher. Tout recours à l'emploi de la force doit être strictement conforme au droit international et le droit international humanitaire doit être respecté par toutes les parties. Dans les circonstances actuelles, la bonne conduite de l'activité diplomatique revêt d'une importance de premier ordre. Les bâtiments diplomatiques ne doivent pas être pris pour cible. Dans de telles situations, le dialogue est essentiel, notamment pour trouver des solutions. Ce Conseil et tous les États doivent jouer pleinement leur rôle pour faciliter la désescalade. La Suisse est prête à apporter sa contribution. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Switzerland and pass the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. Korea also joins in other delegations expressing full support to the assumptions of presidency by Malta, and also commends Japanese excellent leadership of presidents last month. I also thank ASG Khaled Kerry for the very useful briefings. Yesterday, we witnessed another escalatory incident that resulted in casualties in Damascus. Last week, to respond to the situation in Gaza, where over 32,000 people have been killed, 70% of whom are reported to be children and women, this Council finally succeeded in adopting Resolution 2728 to realize an immediate ceasefire, release all hostages, and ensure humanitarian access. Nevertheless, and in the absence of implementation of Resolution 2728, seeing another incident in a neighboring country yesterday is very concerning amidst the high tensions. During the course of our discussions regarding the region since October 7th, the Security Council members have shared an understanding that the Gaza situation should not spill over to neighboring areas. Therefore, the incidents in Damascus yesterday is all the more concerning in the context of the larger development in the region related to Gaza. Yet, we also note with concern that incidents such as this have the potential to spill over into Lebanon too. It is also deeply appalling that the attack took place on diplomatic and consular premises. I would like to reiterate that such attacks are contrary to international law and global norms, and that it is imperative for all members to respect diplomatic and consular missions in times of both war and peace. Madam President, history tells us that an unexpected event could expand into irrecoverable tragedies. We are increasingly concerned that additional violent flashpoints could escalate into new tragedies in the region. And it is civilians who suffer the most in such tragedies, as we bear witness to in the Gaza Strip. Reflecting on history, my delegation shares the position of other Council members calling for restraint from all concerned parties and expressing our heightened concern about any possible escalations. Irrevocable calamities in the future can be prevented if the concerned parties show restraint in the present. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea and pass the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Madam President, thank you for convening the meeting. And let me join colleagues in congratulating Malta on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for this month of April. We also thank and commend Japan on the successful presidency in the month of March. We welcome the presence and participation of the representative of Iran and Syria in this meeting. We also thank ASG Khalid Kiari for the information provided. Sierra Leone at the outset underscores the importance to emphasize the sacrosanct nature of the United Nations Charter and its principles, including the principle enshrined in Article 2, Paragraph 4, which provides that, and I quote, all members shall refrain in their international relation from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations, end of quote. Accordingly, Sierra Leone takes note of the identical letters from Iran and the media reports of missile airstrikes attack at an Iranian diplomatic premises in Damascus, which, as reported, resulted in fatalities. This missile attack on a diplomatic premises implicates breaches of the UN Charter on respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of member states, as well as the 1961 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations and the 1963 Vienna Convention on Consular Relations. Sierra Leone condemns the use of force in violation of the UN Charter, relevant international law, including the development and conduct of friendly relations, diplomatic and consular protections. We also decry conduct in the region that may lead to an escalation or exacerbate tensions in the already volatile situation. The right to life, the protection of civilians and civilian objects, and the protection of diplomatic missions are sacrosanct principles enshrined in international law, and any violation of these principles must be condemned. The targeting of diplomatic missions undermines global peace and security. Fundamental protections, including the inviolability of diplomatic and consular premises, must be upheld to ensure the safety of all diplomats and consular agents and promote peaceful and friendly relations among states. Madam President, in turning to the ongoing hostilities in the conflict in Gaza, in spite of the adoption of Resolution 2728 by the Security Council, which demands an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan in Gaza, leading to a lasting sustainable ceasefire, Sierra Leone expresses deep regret that the resolution is not being respected by the parties to the conflict. It is worth repeating that the parties to the conflict are under obligation to respect the clear demands of the Security Council and are urged to fully implement Resolutions 2712, 2720, and 2728 adopted by this Council since the start of the Gaza conflict. States with influence are once again urged to apply the necessary pressure on the parties to implement these resolutions. We also wish to recall the International Court of Justice indication of provisional measures in its 26 January 2024 order in the application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip, South Africa versus Israel, and the order of 28 March 2024 on the request for the modification of the order of 26 January 2024 indicating provisional measures. The orders of the International Court of Justice, we reiterate, speak to the imperative for an immediate ceasefire respected by all parties, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, the urgent need to expand the flow of humanitarian assistance to, and reinforce the protection of civilians in the entire Gaza Strip. With a lack of due compliance by the parties and full implementation of the Security Council resolution, particularly 2728, we regret to learn of the reports of, and I quote, an Israeli airstrike that killed 7 aid workers from the World Central Kitchen, leading to the charity to suspend delivery on Tuesday of vital food aid in Gaza, end of quote. Regrettably, the tragedy in Gaza seems to have no end or no limits. Civilians, humanitarian workers, journalists have all been tragic victims of the conflict. Without the implementation of the resolutions of the Security Council, we are now at the precipice of putting at risk the credibility and legitimacy of this Council. In closing, Madam President, Sierra Leone urges for restraint and de-escalation to avoid a further deterioration of the situation in Gaza and the Middle East region. We emphasize the importance of implementing all relevant Security Council resolutions, as well as the importance of cooperation to pursue diplomatic means to address all threats to peace and security in the region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone and pass the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. As today is the first open briefing this month, let me take this opportunity to express our sincere gratitude to all Council members for their kind support during Japan's presidency. We wish Ambassador Vanessa Frazier and her able team of Malta the best of luck for the month of April. Let assured our sincere support as we have received from you. I also would like to thank ASG Hiari for his briefing. Although we have yet to confirm the facts on the ground, Japan is monitoring with deep concern the situation following the reported airstrikes against Iranian diplomatic premises in Damascus that allegedly killed at least 13 people, including Iranian officials. Madam President, we are seriously worried about the current volatile situation in the Middle East, in which any additional conflict could lead to a wider escalation and confrontation. Therefore, Japan calls upon all relevant parties to exercise maximum restraint and not to engage in any further destabilizing actions. What is now desperately needed is stability. Japan remains committed to making every effort in close cooperation with fellow Council members and other key stakeholders to prevent a further deterioration of the situation, to restore security and stability, and to find sustainable solution to end the crisis in the region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan and pass the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. Let me congratulate Malta on assuming the presidency for the month of April, and thank Japan for their successful presidency during the month of March. I also thank ASG Chiari for his briefing on Monday's strike in Damascus. We underline the importance of respect for the inviolability of diplomatic premises and protection of diplomatic and consular staff for the proper conduct of diplomatic relations. The safety and security of diplomatic premises and staff is a fundamental principle guiding diplomatic relations. President, we are clear that Iran's role in destabilizing the region through its military, financial and political support to groups which have been conducting and threatening attacks is unacceptable. Amongst the groups which Iran has continued to support are Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, militias in Syria and Iraq, and the Houthis. As well as attacking Israel, these groups have been responsible for the attacks against international shipping, including the deaths of innocent mariners, and attacks against international forces in Iraq and Syria. Our Foreign Secretary has raised repeatedly with his Iranian counterpart the need for this support to cease and for Iran to use its influence over the groups to prevent their attacks. President, the United Kingdom is deeply concerned about the potential for escalation in the region and calls on all parties to reduce tensions. We are committed to de-escalation in the Middle East. We've long been calling for an immediate humanitarian pause in Gaza, leading to a sustainable ceasefire without a return to destruction, fighting, and loss of life, as the fastest way to get hostages out and aid in. This Council sent a clear signal on this just last week when it passed Resolution 2728. We stand ready to work with all members of this Council and the international community
to promote and protect international peace and security in the region and throughout the world. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom and pass the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Madam President, and allow me to firstly congratulate Malta on the assumption of the presidency of the Council, and also to thank Japan for the excellent stewardship of the Council last month. Guyana thanks the presidency for convening today's meeting following reports of an incident involving an airstrike against an Iranian diplomatic facility in Damascus, Syria, yesterday. We thank Assistant Secretary General Mr. Khalid Kiari for the update provided and acknowledge the participation of the permanent representatives of Iran and Syria in the meeting. Guyana strongly condemns this attack. We maintain that any attack against a diplomatic facility is unacceptable and contravenes the fundamental safeguards established in international law, including the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Crimes against Internationally Protected Persons, including diplomatic agents. Guyana joins other Council members in also reaffirming the principles of respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, including the prohibition on the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, as enshrined in the United Nations Charter, and calls upon all states to fully comply with these obligations. We further call for a thorough and swift investigation to determine the circumstances of this incident. We also urge due caution and restraint by all parties and impress upon those involved to avoid any further escalation of tensions in the region that could result in even more tragic consequences. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana and pass the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. And before I begin, let me congratulate you on assuming the presidency and assure you of my government's full support as you carry out your duties. I'd also like to congratulate Japan for its very successful presidency in March. Assistant Secretary General Chiari, thank you for your briefing. Colleagues, as the White House has stated, the United States had no involvement in the reported strike yesterday in Syria. Neither did we know about it ahead of time. We have communicated this directly to Iran. We cannot confirm any information about this event. As we gather details, one thing is clear. Iran and its proxy and partner groups need to avoid escalating tensions in the region. Indeed, since the October 7 terrorist attack on Israel, the United States has repeatedly warned Iran not to take advantage of the situation to escalate its long-standing proxy war against Israel and other actors. Iran has ignored this warning. Terrorists and other armed groups, some backed by the Syrian regime and Iran, have used Syrian territory to plot and launch attacks on Israel and U.S. facilities and personnel. Along the Blue Line, the Iranian-backed and armed Hezbollah attacks Israel regularly. In the Red Sea, Iranian-backed Houthis have violated international law and repeatedly attacked commercial and merchant vessels. Iranian-backed groups also have attacked U.S. diplomatic facilities in Iraq and attacked U.S. military personnel engaged in the fight against ISIL-Daesh. Iran's hand is evident in the actions of all of these terrorists and proxy and partner groups. We have repeatedly warned the Syrian regime to curb Iran's destabilizing actions on its territory. We also have long-standing concerns regarding the use of Syrian territory to launch attacks on neighboring countries. For example, on March 31, an Israeli fighter jet reportedly intercepted a suspicious aerial target making its way toward Israel from the direction of Syria. And on numerous occasions since October 7, we have seen rockets, armed drones, and other weaponry being launched from Syrian territory toward Israeli positions in and around the Golan Heights. We have taken steps in self-defense to respond to attacks on U.S. military personnel conducting operations against Daesh in Syria and Iraq. We will not hesitate to defend our personnel and repeat our prior warnings to Iran and its proxies not to take advantage of the situation. Again, an attack in which we had no involvement or advanced knowledge to resume their attacks on U.S. personnel. Even as we continue to learn more about this incident, it seems clear that every member of this Council should reiterate that all states, including Iran and Syria, have a responsibility to avoid the path of escalation, to stop arming and advising terrorist groups, and to rein in the actions of proxies who threaten regional peace and security. Madam President, 2 final points. I want to be clear. We do not yet have confirmation of the status of the building that was struck in Damascus. Any confirmed attack on property that was in fact a diplomatic facility would be of concern to the United States. Diplomatic missions and their property, as well as official diplomatic residences, must be protected, even and especially in times of armed conflict. As I noted earlier, we are also concerned by reports that terrorist leaders and elements were allegedly present at this facility, and condemn Iran's continued coordination, training, and arming of terrorists and other violent extremists. Colleagues, we are saddened and gravely concerned by reports of an IDF airstrike on the World Central Kitchen convoy. This incident is yet a further reminder that Israel needs to do much more to protect humanitarian personnel and facilities in Gaza. It is unacceptable and inexplicable that nearly 6 months into this conflict, Israeli military deconfliction mechanisms are not functioning appropriately. We join other countries who lost citizens in this incident in calling for a transparent and comprehensive investigation. This must not happen again. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United States and pass the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta. Permítame primero saludar a la presidencia de Malta durante este mes y al tiempo desearle todo el éxito y el apoyo de nuestra delegación. Quisiera también aprovechar esta ocasión para agradecer a Japón por su extraordinario liderazgo mostrado durante el mes de marzo en la conducción del Consejo de Seguridad. Señora Presidenta, agradezco la información proporcionada por el secretario general adjunto Khaled Hiari, y el Ecuador condena toda violación que se realice contra misiones y representantes diplomáticos y consulares, así como aquellas que atenten contra la seguridad e integridad de las misiones y los representantes de las organizaciones internacionales intergubernamentales y a los funcionarios de dichas organizaciones, y rechaza estos actos de violencia, vengan de quien vengan. Hacemos eco de las declaraciones emitidas por el secretario general sobre el ataque a la sede diplomática iraní, evento que no solo contraviene los principios enmarcados en la normativa internacional que rige el comportamiento entre los estados, sino que ha cobrado nuevamente la vida de civiles y ha destruido infraestructura civil. Mi delegación reitera su posición de que nada justifica este tipo de ataques y reafirma las obligaciones que todos los estados, según el derecho internacional, tienen de respetar la inmunidad y la inviolabilidad de los locales diplomáticos y consulares, así como las disposiciones de la Convención de Viena sobre Relaciones Diplomáticas de 1961 y de Relaciones Consulares de 1963. Toda transgresión a esta normativa internacional en este asunto constituye un incidente grave que pone en peligro vidas, causa daños y afecta negativamente la promoción de los valores compartidos de la comunidad internacional. Por ello, el Ecuador espera que estos actos sean debidamente investigados y los autores procesados y llevados ante la justicia. Más aún, reiteramos nuestra preocupación porque actos como este, en medio de una situación geopolítica mundial sumamente compleja, exacerben las tensiones y puedan ser detonantes de acciones de consecuencias imprevisibles para la paz y la seguridad internacionales, por lo que además seguimos llamando a los estados a obrar con la máxima contención. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Ecuador and pass the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Thank you. Madam President, allow me to begin by reiterating our warmest congratulations to you and to your country for assuming the presidency of the Security Council for the month of April. We also wish to assure you our support, our fullest support during your presidency. to Japan, we express our gratitude for the successful presidency of the Security Council during the month of March. We also are grateful to Assistant Secretary General, Mr. Khaled Kiari, for providing insights into this grave matter. Madam President, yesterday's airstrike, which reportedly resulted in significant loss of lives and damage to the consular section of Iran embassy, constitutes a flagrant violation of the UN Charter, international law, and the inviolability of the diplomatic and consular premises enshrined in the Vienna Conventions. These fundamental principles and laws must be respected and observed and upheld by all states, without any exception. Mozambique strongly condemned this unacceptable attack. The incident starkly reminds us of the ongoing conflict, geopolitical complexity in the Middle East, particularly concerning the Palestine question and the ongoing tensions between Israel and its neighbors. We believe that such actions could potentially escalate regional tensions, trigger further conflicts involving other countries, and could have unimaginable implication for regional and international peace and security. Madam President, in light of this situation, this grave situation, it is imperative that all parties involved, especially Israel, strictly adhere to international legal norms and agreements. Upholding these fundamental principles is essential to prevent further military confrontation and maintain stability. The Security Council must closely monitor the situation and take necessary measures to prevent further escalation of hostilities resulting from this attack. We reiterate our consistent appeal to Council members to redouble efforts toward a sustainable solution to the Middle East conflict in full compliance with relevant Security Council and General Assembly resolutions. We commend ongoing diplomatic efforts by various actors, including certain members of this Council, aimed at re-establishing a path toward peaceful coexistence among neighboring states and peoples in the Middle East. Finally, let us collectively and genuinely work towards a peaceful and stable Middle East region, mindful of legitimate concerns of all parties involved. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique. I will now deliver a statement in my national capacity. Let me begin by thanking ASG Chiari for his remarks today. The Middle East continues to be in a state of turmoil. As we have stated on several occasions, this volatile situation is completely untenable. At a time during which all sides should be focused on diffusing tensions, all we are witnessing are steps in the opposite direction. The airstrikes carried out against the Iranian consulate in Damascus yesterday evening are just the latest episode of a long string of deeply troubling events. We are worried that this attack takes place against a backdrop of death and destruction in the region. We stress that international law, including international humanitarian law, must be respected at all times. This also includes respect for the inviolability of diplomatic missions and protection of diplomatic staff. This Council has repeatedly heard the warnings that such strikes only exacerbate tensions and increase the risk of regional conflict. Furthermore, they risk worsening the already dire humanitarian situation of the Syrian population. Regrettably, the regional ramifications of the conflict in Gaza continue to be felt. I repeat and emphasize that de-escalation must remain our highest priority. Maximum restraint must be exercised by all actors in the region at this extremely delicate moment. This starts with the implementation of Resolution 2728, which demands an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and the release of all hostages. Just like all other Security Council resolutions, this resolution is binding and must be respected. From Damascus to Gaza to the Red Sea to the Blue Line, all our diplomatic expertise and collective leverage must be brought to bear to quell the flames of war before they are fanned out of control. Cool heads must prevail, or the consequences will be catastrophic. Thank you. I now resume my function as President of the Council. The representative of the Russian Federation has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Госпожа председатель, мы внимательно выслушали сегодняшние выступления западных коллег из тройки постоянных членов Совета Безопасности и лишний раз поразились их цинизму и двойным стандартам. Из их сегодняшней словесной эквилибристики вообще сложно было понять, ради чего мы сегодня здесь собрались. У представителя Франции прозвучало все, что угодно, только ни слова осуждения очередного нарушения международного права со стороны Израиля. Ведь речь идет о целенаправленном ударе по дипломатическому учреждению. Коллеги, а если бы атаке подверглось ваше посольство или консульство в регионе, вы бы также реагировали? Вот он ваш порядок, основанный на правилах во всей его очевидности. У Соединенных Штатов всегда есть информация по любому поводу из первых рук, обладать которой они гордятся, поскольку благодаря своим разведывательным возможностям они всегда все узнают первыми. А тут ведь вот как удивительно, в Соединенных Штатах до сих пор нет подтвержденных данных по поводу Израиля, по поводу удара по Генеральному консульству Ирана. Вот ведь какая незадача. Так и хочется сказать, не верю. В выступлениях Соединенного Королевства и США скорее можно было найти не только намеки, но и прямые ссылки на то, что Иран и Сирия сами виноваты в том, что Израиль ударил по иранскому консульству. Большего кощунства себе трудно представить. Не надо навешивать, не надо призывать других к деэскалации и навешивать ярлыки агрессоров на жертв этой атаки. В этом контексте любая возможная эскалация ситуации будет полностью лежать на вашей совести. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Madam President, at the outset, allow me to congratulate you for assuming the presidency of the Security Council for this month. We thank Russia for requesting this urgent meeting, which focuses on the heinous and terrorist attacks committed by the Israeli regime against the diplomatic premises in flagrant violation of international law. We also thank China and other members who supported convening the meeting. We thank Mr. Khaled Khiari, ASG, for his briefing. Madam President, yesterday, we urgently notified the Security Council members of yet another flagrant violation of international law committed by the Israeli regime within Syria territory. As reflected in our letter, on 1st April 2024, our diplomatic premises in Damascus came under terrorist attacks carried out by the Israeli regime. 7 missile airstrikes from the occupied Golan Heights specifically and intentionally targeted the diplomatic premises of Iran, including the consular section, building, and the ambassador's residence. Tragically, these heinous attacks resulted in a martyrdom of 7 Iranian personnel, including senior military advisors, and some others were injured. Alongside the complete destruction of the consular building, the embassy's administrative parts also suffered significant damage due to the explosions. The final and accurate death toll remains uncertain, as the entire diplomatic premise has been destroyed within individuals trapped under the rubble. Madam President, the Islamic Republic of Iran strongly condemns these horrific crimes and quarterly terrorist attacks. The Israeli regime committed a flagrant violation of the United Nations Charter, international law, and the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic. The crime committed yesterday by the Israeli regime goes beyond mere criminality. It represents a profound affront to the shared principle of the international community, namely the inviolability of representatives and diplomatic and consular premises. This principle is a cornerstone upon which international relations are built, universally recognized and upheld. This crime brutally breaches the fundamental principle of diplomatic and consular immunity and flagrantly violated the 1961 Convention on Diplomatic Relations, the 1963 Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, and the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Crimes Against Internationally Protected Persons, including diplomatic agents of 1973. Madam President, the Security Council has consistently united in unequivocal condemnation of the violent assaults on embassies and consular premises of member states. The Security Council has always reaffirmed that such reprehensible acts, regardless of motive or perpetrator, are unjustifiable. Given the grave repercussions of this reprehensible act, which could escalate tensions in the region and potentially spark further conflict involving other nations, we call on the Security Council to vehemently condemn this unjustified criminal act and terrorist attack. Madam President, it's now crystal clear that Israel's ongoing destabilized and irresponsible actions and atrocities against the nations in our region are a real threat to regional and international peace and security. This regime has consistently demonstrated disregard for international law, the UN Charter, and humanitarian and human rights principles. Israel's agenda is obvious: to escalate and perpetuate the conflict while evading accountability. It did not redline to kill civilians and even used starvation as a method of warfare. Its primary concern is the unlawful use of force to advance its apartheid policies, ethnic cleansing, genocidal acts, and military objectives in Gaza at all costs. Despite repeated calls from Council members, Israel continues in its atrocious and genocidal acts against the defenseless people of Gaza. And despite international pressure and UN Security Council resolutions calling for a ceasefire, Israel has defied these resolutions. Rather, its focus remains on committing more atrocious crimes, showing no regard for international legal obligations. Just today, this regime outraged and killed the World Central Aid workers in Gaza. As the Undersecretary General highlighted, they were the heroes killed while trying to feed starving people. Regrettably, the absence of accountability and the Council's inaction has only encouraged and even emboldened this regime to continue its violation unchecked. It is high time for the Security Council to shoulder its responsibility and address the real threat to international peace and security. The Security Council must promptly fulfill its duty in response to Israel's reckless defiance. Urgent and enforceable measures must be taken to compel this regime to uphold its obligations. Madam President, the Islamic Republic of Iran has exercised considerable restraint, but it is imperative to acknowledge that there are limits to such forbearance. The occupying regime must bear full responsibility for its consequences. Iran reserves its legitimate and inherent right under international law and the United Nations Charter to take a decisive response to such reprehensible acts. Madam President, the representative of the United States and United Kingdom once again tried to deny its responsibility for the current situation in Syria and broad region by falsely blaming Iran. Iran strongly rejects these allegations. Iran is never seeking to contribute to the spillover of the conflict in the region, nor does it to escalate or spread the tension to the entire region. Despite expressing concern over the spillover of the tension in the region, the United States tries to misuse this situation to destabilize Syria and the region. The United States is responsible for all crimes committed by the Israeli regime. The savage and genocide acts in Gaza could not be happened without explicit consent and comprehensive political, financial, and military support, as well as partnership from the United States. Ironically, the United States talks too much about protecting civilians in Gaza and also expresses its concern about the violation of humanitarian law. At the same time, it has blocked the Security Council for over 6 months from taking urgent and appropriate action to stop the war in Gaza. If the U.S. genuinely cares about civilians and upholds humanitarian international law, it should refrain from blaming Iran and instead compel the Israeli regime to implement the UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire. Madam President, about the United Kingdom allegations, instead of deflecting blame onto others, the UK should face up to its mistakes and rectify its detrimental policies that have adversely affected the people of the region. The long-standing suffering of the Palestinian people, persisting for over 7 decades, can be traced back directly to the colonial policies of the United Kingdom. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran and pass the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا سيد الرئيس، وهنئكم بداية بتولي رئاسة مجلس الأمن لشهر نيسان إبريل الجاري، وأشكر سلفكم المندوب الدائم لليابان وفريقه على إدارته الناجحة لأعمال مجلس الأمن الشهر الماضي. كما يتوجه وفد بلادي بالشكر لوفدي الاتحاد الروسي وجمهورية الصين الشعبية على جهودهما لعقد هذه الجلسة الطارئة لمجلس الأمن. السيد الرئيس، في حلقة أخرى من سلسلة متواصلة من الاعتداءات الإسرائيلية على بلادي سوريا، شنت قوات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي في حوالي الساعة 5 بتوقيت دمشق من يوم أمس 1 من نيسان إبريل، وفي وضح النهار وساعات الذروة، عدوانا همجيا برشقات من الصواريخ من جهة الجولان السوري المحتل، مستهدفة مبنى القنصلية الإيرانية في حي المزة بالعاصمة السورية دمشق. لقد أدى هذا العدوان الهمجي إلى تدمير البناء بكامله واستشهاد وإصابة كل من بداخله من سوريين وإيرانيين، إضافة إلى عدد من المارة في تلك المنطقة. إن مبنى القنصلية الإيرانية الذي تم استهدافه يقع في منطقة مكتظة بالمدنيين، ويبعد أمتارا قليلة عن مقرات بعثات دبلوماسية أجنبية ومنظمات دولية بما فيها برنامج الأغذية العالمي، إضافة إلى مشفى خاص وكليات تابعة لجامعة دمشق وعدد من المصارف والشركات الخاصة. كما يعبر هذه المنطقة الحيوية يوميا آلاف المدنيين باعتبارها شريانا أساسيا للتنقل في المدينة، وقد تعرض عدد من هؤلاء لإصابات بالغة جراء هذا العدوان الإرهابي الذي يشكل سابقة خطيرة وانتهاكا جسيما للمواثيق والأعراف الدولية التي تكفل حماية المقرات الدبلوماسية والعاملين فيها وحصانتها وحظر أي اعتداءات عليها، بما في ذلك اتفاقيتي فيينا للعلاقات الدبلوماسية والقنصلية واتفاقية منع الجرائم بحق الأشخاص المحميين دوليا بمن فيهم الطواقم الدبلوماسية والمعاقبة على تلك الجرائم. السيد الرئيس، لقد طالت هذه الاعتداءات الهستيرية الإسرائيلية أيضا على مدى الأيام الماضية مبان ومنشآت مدنية في ريف دمشق وعددا من المناطق في ريف حلب ودير الزور، وأسفرت عن استشهاد وجرح عدد من المدنيين والعسكريين ووقوع خسائر مادية بالممتلكات العامة والخاصة، وذلك في انتهاك سافر للقانون الدولي والقانون الدولي الإنساني ومبادئ ومقاصد الأمم المتحدة. لقد تزامنت تلك الاعتداءات مع هجمات شنتها المجموعات والكيانات الإرهابية التي تنشط في شمال غرب سوريا باستخدام الطيران المسير ضد المدنيين في مدينة حلب وريفها. كما تزامنت الاعتداءات الإسرائيلية مع هجمات إرهابية ارتكبها تنظيم داعش الإرهابي في مناطق شرقي البلاد، وهو ما يؤكد مجددا التنسيق القائم والمستمر وتوزيع الأدوار بين سلطات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي وأدواتها من التنظيمات الإرهابية. السيد الرئيس، إن سلطات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي ما كانت لتقدم على هذا العدوان على مقر دبلوماسي محمي بموجب القانون الدولي وعلى غيره من الأعيان المدنية من مطارات وموانئ وأحياء سكنية لولا الدعم الأمريكي الأعمى الذي وفر لها على مدى عقود مظلة من الرعاية والإفلات من العقاب، ومكنها من ارتكاب أبشع الفظائع، وآخرها جريمة الإبادة الجماعية والجرائم الوحشية المتواصلة بحق الشعب الفلسطيني منذ ما يقارب 6 أشهر. لا بل إن الإدارة الأمريكية سارعت بعد اعتماد المجلس للقرار 2728 للزعم بأنه غير ملزم ولا يفرض أي التزامات جديدة، وذلك لتعفي إسرائيل من تطبيقه ومن وقف إطلاق النار في استهتار سافر بدماء أكثر من 33 ألف شهيد مدني 33 ألف شهيد مدني من أبناء الشعب الفلسطيني، جلهم من النساء والأطفال، وأكثر من 173 من طواقم الأونروا، والعشرات غيرهم من طواقم المنظمات الإنسانية الأخرى. وقد سمعنا جميعا اليوم عن الاستهداف الإسرائيلي الذي أودى بحياة 7 من طواقم منظمة إنسانية تعمل في غزة، وهو أمر فشل زميلنا ممثل الولايات المتحدة في إدانته. كما أدى العدوان الإسرائيلي لاستشهاد ومقتل أعداد من الصحفيين ودمار آلاف الأبنية السكنية ودور العبادة والمنشآت الصحية والتعليمية بما فيها مقرات عائدة للأمم المتحدة. إن بلادي سوريا تحمل مجرمي الحرب في حكومة الاحتلال الإسرائيلي وشركائهم في الإدارة الأمريكية المسؤولية الكاملة عن تلك الاعتداءات وتبعاتها على السلم والأمن الإقليميين والدوليين، وعن الدفع بالمنطقة إلى مستويات غير مسبوقة من التصعيد وعدم الاستقرار، وتحذر من مغبة التمادي في هذه الاعتداءات والسياسات الرعناء. تطالب سوريا الأمم المتحدة بتحمل مسؤولياتها الأساسية في إدانة الاعتداءات الإسرائيلية المتكررة والتحرك بشكل فوري لوضع حد لها ومنع تكرارها ومساءلة مرتكبيها وضمان عدم إفلاتهم من العقاب. وتشدد على أن إخفاق مجلس الأمن في النهوض بمسؤولياته جراء الدور المعرقل للولايات المتحدة يقوض نظام الأمن الجماعي الذي قامت عليه منظمتنا منظمة الأمم المتحدة، ويدفع الدول الأعضاء فيها للاعتقاد بعدم جدوى التعويل على قوة القانون والشرعية الدولية لاسترداد حقوقها. ختاما السيد الرئيس، تؤكد الجمهورية العربية السورية على أن هذه الاعتداءات لن تثنيها عن خياراتها الوطنية ومواقفها الراسخة الداعمة لحق الشعب الفلسطيني في تقرير مصيره وإقامة دولته المستقلة وعاصمتها القدس، ولا عن سعيها لاسترداد الجولان السوري المحتل كاملا حتى خط الرابع من حزيران لعام 1967 وتحرير كامل أراضيها من الوجود العسكري الأجنبي اللا شرعي وأدواته من التنظيمات الإرهابية بكافة السبل التي يكفلها القانون الدولي. شكرا سيد الرئيس.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic. There are no more names inscribed in the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.